out there to voters at the same time, too.
Right. And it's important to note that in the likely event this goes to a runoff, then we're going to have another 2 weeks with just a couple of candidates sort of battling it out. And then once we hit the end of August, it doesn't slow down from there. Now you have 2 months for the general election, and so it's only going to get crazier from this point forward.
And Kirk, we'll jump into the field shortly, but again, I think folks, obviously when it's like the June primaries, some engaged voters are aware of that. It's June. They kind of expect that every even year. November, everyone knows the general election. But we are in August. School is back. People are winding down vacations, winding down summer. This is not exactly top of mind for a lot of folks. We did see over the past 3 days last week for early in-person voting, some 61,000 voters did cast ballots across the state. But again, it's August 11th. We're seeing numbers coming in still with about 28% of the votes counted. And they're looking pretty low. So, I mean, it's a huge turnout game here. I think those candidates were really aware of that. And you really have to battle for every vote, especially when you look at Frye and Norman pretty much being neck and neck right now.
Right. And on top of everything you just said, you also have to factor in the notion that with the primary in June, people who voted there were questions about whether they were eligible to vote this time, or if you didn't vote in June or voted in the Democratic primary. So the state GOP and the state election commission had to put out some clarifications on who could cast a vote. And it's not clear the extent to which that message got out to everyone. And so there's just been some confusion on top of this whirlwind sprint that's happening and these simultaneous events are kind of making it difficult for people to recognize, can I go out and cast this vote? If so, where am I going to go? My polling places have shifted since many of them were in schools, and schools started today, and there's just been a lot of confusion.
Luckily, one factor that was on every candidate's side today was the weather. So besides the extreme heat and humidity, it wasn't too bad. But yeah, a lot of polling locations were consolidated, like you said. Again, if you voted in the Republican primary, you were eligible to vote in this primary. If you didn't vote at all, you can still vote in this primary. But if no one gets that 50% plus one vote, that's that majority needed. Of course, when you have 10 candidates splitting this very small vote, it's looking like that runoff is going to happen on the 25th in 2 weeks, like you said. We'll have you back, Kirk. Don't worry. I think.
I'm looking forward to it.
Don't want to ruin any surprises. But again, it is kind of spread across the board right now. And all the polling kind of dictated that, too. We never saw any real clear front runner happening, again, because this has been just such a compressed timeline, too.
Yeah, and looking at what we have, so the early numbers in, you have Senator Graham sort of in the lead, Congressman Norman, Frye sort of neck and neck polling second, and I don't think that's all that surprising. Those were sort of the three front runners going into this. It will be curious among Norman and Frye who sort of emerges in that second place. It'll be curious if Graham can hold on to the lead. I think jumping out early bodes well for her, but whether she can hold on to that lead as we start moving and getting returns from other parts of the state. So you've got a lot of interesting things happening right now, and all this could shift over the next hour or so.
And that's what we're here watching for. But we're going to jump over to Maayan Schechter, who is in Columbia at Senator Darlene Graham's watch party. And Maayan's freshly back in the saddle. We're glad to have her here. Maayan, what's it like over there? I know it's pretty crowded and noisy, so let us know what's happening there.
Right. Well, I'm at Darlene Graham's campaign watch party. I wouldn't necessarily put a lot of emphasis on party. Right now, it is just reporters, and we are literally on top of each other here at a space that is in the same strip mall as Senator Darlene Graham's campaign headquarters, which, of course, was the campaign headquarters of her late brother, Senator Lindsey Graham. That we do expect there to be family members, maybe friends here, but we haven't seen any of them yet. We've only seen campaign campaign staff here today so far, so they may be behind closed doors waiting for these votes to get in. Of course, you all have mentioned the fact that Senator Darlene Graham is ahead of this 10-person race right now, and really the race seems to be about who's going to come in second, who's going to be in that runoff with Senator Graham. Will it be Congressman Ralph Norman or will it be Russell Fry? But right now we are just kind of in a holding period.
Jemion, so are we, and I think it is kind of interesting, Kirk, too. We're not seeing big watch parties, big celebration parties, because it is kind of like the first step. I mean, obviously on the 25th, I think we'll see some different setups going on. That was pretty similar to what we saw in the governor's race, too. And we're going to jump to Reagan Knight, who's down in Charleston at former Governor Mark Sanford's watch party, too. Reagan, what's going on down there at Kickin' Chicken?
Hey, Gavin. Well, from the Low Country all the way down to Hilton Head Island, there are campaign signs of Mark Sanford made out of plywood and black spray paint, identical to the ones that are directly behind me. But right now, I am in Mount Pleasant at the Kickin' Chicken, where Mark Sanford's watch party is. The former governor is not here yet, but right now the livelihood here it's very uplifting right now. Classic rock's playing. Everybody's out here having a good time, having beers. We do have TVs all around me, keeping track of the poll numbers as they're starting to come through across the state. I did speak to a few voters tonight, actually, including Mark Sanford's son, Landon, and one voter told me that he is a registered Democrat and is a lifelong Democrat and has only ever voted for Senator John McCain back in 2008 in the presidential election. He told me tonight that he did vote for Annie Andrews originally against Lindsey Graham, but tonight he came out and voted for Mark Sanford because he told me that, well, a Republican is most likely going to win this election in November, and if there was any Republican that I was going to vote for, it would be the former Governor Mark Sanford. And the reason why is because he told me that, well, Sanford is big on fiscal responsibility and that he is a never Trumper. Another lady I spoke to tonight said she came out and is a lifelong Republican, but is getting tired of President Trump and some of his policies and wants change at the national level. And that is why she came out and voted for Mark Sanford. I spoke to his son, Landon, this evening, and I did ask him, was this a shock to his family for the former governor to come back into the spotlight? And he said it was. And I did ask him, depending on tonight's results, what is next in store for the former governor if he were to potentially lose the primary race. And he said the former governor should be answering that question sometime tonight. We're still keeping an eye out for the former governor, but we expect him to be here in the next 15, 20 minutes or so. Gavin?
Great. Thanks, Reagan, for that report down there in the Low Country. Now we're going to jump to Scott Morgan, who's up there for Congressman Ralph Norman's watch party. Scott, what's going on up there?
Hey, Gavin. Yeah, it's a little muggy, it's a little festive, it's a little stormy outside. So there's all kind of atmosphere happening here. The congressman showed up about 20 minutes ago, and he's upstairs. Everybody's kind of in wait mode. We're all keeping an eye on the results, and you've been saying it yourself. Darlene Graham looks like she's going to advance to the runoff, but then you've got this kind of battle back and forth between Russell Fry and Ralph Norman. They kind of keep switching second and third place. So there's a lot going on, and yet not really much going on. We're just kind of waiting for the results to come in. In the meantime, we're at Hobos in Rock Hill, where, Ralph Norman is from Rock Hill. This actually is one of the projects that his company helped renovate. So he's very tied to the community, and he wants to make sure he reminds people that he's tied to the community. So he had to, he picked this place. So it's, people are just kind of hanging out, doing their thing, and just kind of waiting for the results. And we're waiting to see if it's actually going to thunderstorm on us because it's a little boomy outside.
Scott, we appreciate it. And Scott's up there in Rock Hill, too, so he knows that area, and he knows the congressman pretty well. We're going to look at some updated results right now for this race. Of course, it's been about an hour and 15 minutes since the polls closed, and Senator Darlene Graham is still holding strong in that first place position there, too, at 32%, followed by Congressman Russell Fry at 23% and Congressman Ralph Norman at 23%, still neck and neck between the two of them. And former Governor and former Congressman Mark Sanford has 15% there, followed by upstate businessman Mark Lynch at 5%. A lot to talk about here, Kirk, when we look at this race, but let's go ahead and start with Darlene before I go through all my other notes. But I was on a town hall, tele-rally with the president yesterday, as well as Darlene Graham, and he was talking about how he supported her, how he basically told her to get in this race, which I think was a surprise to a lot of folks, that she decided that after the governor appointed her to serve out the rest of her brother's term. And he said, Darlene, she's tough. She looks nice, but she's actually tough and strong. She's the perfect person to carry on Lindsay's legacy and, frankly, what I want to do. And we're accomplishing things at record pace like no one's ever seen before. And I saw her on Saturday, and she said, and I said, what's it been like over these past 4 weeks? I mean, you just lost your brother who basically helped raise you when you lost your parents as a teenager. He's been there throughout your life. You've had these high-profile events over the past few weeks at the National Cathedral in South Carolina, then back to work in the Senate, voting on, the AG and these huge bills. And she says it's been pretty brutal. She hadn't slept in 2 days. I mean, it's kind of remarkable to see that kind of ability to adapt to this when I think a lot of people would be just maybe throwing their hands up at that point.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize exactly what you just said. That Lindsey Graham was such a huge figure in her life. I mean, it was literally her surrogate father after their father passed away, their mother passed away. And you think any of us sort of regular people, if we have someone that close to us, we take time to mourn. And Senator Graham did not have that mourning period. So she was thrown right into the middle of things. And then announcing that she wanted to seek the full term has not given her any pause whatsoever to deal with the grief, with the aftermath of her brother's passing. And now you have that morning, you have the normal work of any senator, which is a lot, and then a campaign in this whirlwind moment.
Yeah.
It's like the trifecta of stuff that she is having to deal with, and I can only imagine the amount of stress she must be feeling.
And again, after that funeral last, I guess 2 Wednesdays ago when we were up on the, here in Columbia talking about that, she really hit the ground running the next day on that Thursday with an ad up and really pushing the field. A lot of the press, we did see her at that stump on that following Saturday. There was a debate that Monday where a lot of voters actually pretty much got introduced to her for the first time. A lot of political consultants like to say that debates don't matter. As a debate moderator, I completely disagree with that. But also, based on what I heard from these voters, we also disagree with that because they got to see and hear and see how she would behave and deal with these guys who are a lot more seasoned than she is. And a lot of people said she held her own. That sold them on her. She wasn't able to go to that second debate because she had to go back up to D.C. and vote on things. So I think it's kind of interesting to see how that has played out. But then she also got some heat from us in the press because she didn't talk to us as much. She was talking to Fox News hosts. She eventually started doing more gaggles and interviews. Even today when she voted in Lexington County, she had a huge swarm of reporters and didn't really seem to blink at it either, which is kind of remarkable. Again, kind of this whole whirlwind that you're talking about and just able to jump right into it. And when everyone's looking at you under this microscope, she's not cracking.
Yeah, what I've been impressed with from her so far is her ability to come at this, or to, I guess, lean into the fact that she is new to this. And there are a lot of voters who, frankly, are just fed up with the typical politics of Washington, D.C. And so she is able to play up the fact that she's a mom. She's a regular person.
Right.
And I think that's resonating with people. And in that first debate, that was sort of the message that she put front and center. You have that combined with the endorsement from Donald Trump, which came very early in this cycle. I think that woke a lot of people up. And then finally, kind of the third part of her stool, she just has Lindsey Graham's office staff, which they've been there for years. They are seasoned veterans of all of this. And I think they're helping her navigate both the pressures of the Senate and the pressures of the campaign. Doesn't make this easy, but I think it makes it a little bit easier for her to kind of do what she's comfortable doing to get that message forward.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, like you're saying, with all these people and the support, it comes down to the candidate, and she's proving that. And actually, we have some breaking news for you right now. The Associated Press said that Darlene Graham, Senator Graham, is advancing to the runoff on August 25th there. Right now, she has about 32% of the vote, so safe margin there, especially when you look at Congressman Russell Fry and Congressman Ralph Norman at 23% apiece, really vying. I mean, that is the dead heat that is the horse race we're watching right now. But we're going to jump to Maayan Schechter, who's at Senator Graham's watch party here in Columbia. Hey, Maayan, what's it like over there?
Hey, it's still, Gavin, it is still just media here, but given the fact that the Associated Press has gone ahead and called Senator Darlene Graham to be in that runoff, we do expect her soon. We haven't gotten a heads up quite yet from her campaign staff on when she will be here, but we do expect her in the room soon. And you all spoke about Senator Graham and how voters are talking about her. And as you mentioned, this has been a very unusual sprint for her, but for all of the candidates, but especially for her, someone who still was very much unknown to the larger South Carolina population. We heard from a lot of voters who really appreciated her debate performance, really like how she sounded on the stump, and also, again, loved Senator Lindsey Graham, and so therefore have shared the love for Senator Darlene Graham too. And so, as you mentioned, really the race is coming down neck and neck to Congressman Ralph Norman and Congressman Russell Fry. And again, so we expect Senator Darlene Graham to be out here soon, any moment, and we'll see what she has to say to voters in South Carolina. Again, she just had been on a sprint through this primary, and it's going to be an even greater sprint. That's going to put her a lot in South Carolina into the runoff.
Right, Mylan. It doesn't stop tonight. It just gets more intense. And like we said, we will go to the senator's watch party when she does take the podium. I would like to tell them that we are off the air at 9 o'clock, so anytime between now and then will be fantastic for our coverage here. But of course, Kirk, I want to just really, before we jump back to this neck and neck between the two congressmen, talk about the similarities between Darlene Graham and then her late brother Lindsey. And one of the big differences, too, is that the foreign policy aspect of the late senator. Of course, he had those chops. He was always doing that. We saw the world leaders attend his funerals. Kind of talk about that, because that was something we heard from other candidates in this race, too, to really focus on domestic issues, this affordability issue, how that pivot is playing out and what voters want to see.
There are a couple things that I think Senator Graham has done that I believe have just been brilliant. One, and we haven't really talked about this at all, but the fact that she is going by Darlene Graham rather than Norden, that I think that the Graham name resonates with people within the state, and I think that's a very smart move on her part to remind people that she is Lindsey Graham's sister. But then you mentioned the differences. Rather than try and just replicate a Lindsey Graham, she doesn't have the foreign policy credentials, but she has leaned into the domestic side of things, and in particular, prices. And again, this is where her identity as just a regular mom, I think, is playing very well. She can talk about shopping for groceries. She can talk about the expenses, affordability, things that the Republican Party right now are wrestling with nationwide. She is leaning into that and basically saying, I can speak to this from the place that the average American or the average South Carolinian can, that maybe the other candidates just don't recognize or don't really identify themselves as much. And that's something that I think voters are very much appreciating. And that could potentially be yet another reason why we're seeing these numbers come in the way we are.
Right, and that, excuse me, that kind of goes back to what we're talking about, Kirk, in terms of this pressure cooker of a campaign the past month and now the future 2 weeks, that might actually be to her advantage when you think about it. Again, just imagine, for example, if the late senator died 2 years into his 6-year term, and what that kind of race would look like if she was appointed to that, or any number of things like that. I mean, it just changes the dynamic so drastically compared to this past month, and I don't think people really realize that, and how much the little things and personalities and established backgrounds make a difference in this race too, as we're seeing play out right now for second place here. But it's super interesting to see that Darlene is able to get above that, and people are saying, yeah, I like the way she did in the debate. She's an outsider, truly an outsider, tangential to politics because of her whole life, but interesting to see that as well. But I also talked to voters about the Trump endorsement, and we saw this play out in the June 9th primary for the Republican gubernatorial race, when we saw President Trump endorse not just Pam Evitt ahead of that, the lieutenant governor, but then also the person she was running off in the runoff against with Attorney General Alan Wilson, the dual endorsement. I wonder if that happens again in this runoff, but if depending on who gets in there with her, what that's going to be like, what she needs to do to survive August 25th.
Yeah, if I was going to try and read her mind, which obviously, no one can, but it seems like her strategy so far has been to take this campaign into two different segments. So segment one is just make sure I'm one of the top two. And I've got the president's endorsement. That's going to go a long way. I've got the Graham name. I have the Graham staff. And so I can be a bit more selective about the events in which I appear, the rooms that I speak to, how I get my message out, because I just have to be one of the top two. Then once this gets solidified, we get past tonight, then she can focus in on running against one other person rather than 10 other people. And if she survives that, then it's the sprint to November. But your comment about President Trump and whether he might try a double endorsement like he did in the gubernatorial race, I think that's a really interesting question. And obviously, it's unclear what the president will do. If nothing else, he's just demonstrated that you can't really script him at all.
That's right.
But I think it is very likely, very possible, that he will try and endorse both candidates or essentially say, I'd be happy either way. In which case, Darlene Graham has to make sure that in those next 2 weeks, she's able to stand on her own, regardless of whether Donald Trump endorses her opponent or not.
Right, and that comes down to the power of the candidate and doing it yourself. But also, she has that huge Graham machine behind her, that campaign machine, that staff, not just in Washington, but across the state, as well as, and then the campaign apparatus too. But it comes down to people having these experiences with Graham and seeing similarities in her and saying, okay, well, it worked with him. Let's continue this on. But there's also pushback when it came to Graham in the first place. I mean, he always had these primary challenges. He always won them outright despite the challenge, always from his far right. Even most recently with Mark Lynch, who's in 5th place, it looks like, not really moving past that. But he got 28% of the vote in June. And a lot of national people were like, oh my gosh, is Lindsey Graham going to get into a runoff? And I just remember laughing at people like, in what world would that happen? Right. And especially with his support from Trump and his ability to really just adapt is the word, evolve is another word, and survive is the biggest word that you can describe Lindsey Graham with, because that's what he has done his entire life, losing his parents that early in his 20s, raising his sister, and then just making it through life and these Senate terms. That's what we're seeing playing out right now. But let's talk about the other folks that are vying for second place right now. Of course, like we said, the Associated Press has called Senator Darlene Graham advancing to the August 25th primary, runoff primary, and it's about 8:30, so polls have been closed for about an hour and a half. But it is neck and neck for 5th District Congressman Ralph Norman and 7th District Congressman Russell Fry, both of them representing different areas of our state, with Congressman Fry down there on the coast, the PD and the Grand Strand, home to Horry County, a massive Republican stronghold where he's solidly in the lead there. We see Ralph Norman doing well in the upstate areas, especially in York County, where he is home. His home is, and then of course in places like Cherokee County and Spartanburg County and Greenville County, all of those upstate counties, he's really doing well in, neck and neck with Darlene in some places, but really flexing that muscle. And I think when it comes down to this too, Kirk, what we're talking about here is we're talking about the need to get that name ID up early. He was able to do basically a turnkey campaign, just refresh some graphics from his governor's run. He came in 3rd in the governor's race in June. He backed Alan Wilson immediately. I don't think we're going to see Alan Wilson, the Attorney General, who's the Republican gubernatorial nominee, backing anyone. Probably for the best. That was him, keep your powder dry. But it was interesting because he was able to just jump in and start working. And he's not running for re-election in the House, unlike Russell Fry, which is a big liability for him when it comes to the slim margins in the U.S. House, especially what's supposed to be a very bruising midterm for the Republicans. There's a lot of concerns about what that means for the House majority for Republicans and how soon they could get a replacement in there for Russell if he were to win, if he were to get in the runoff and beat Senator Darlene Graham. So, I mean, when you look at that, all those factors there too, Kirk, how's that shaken out? Yeah,
so considering both of those individuals, they both had endorsements from Trump for their House races. And as you mentioned, Norman may have had going into this the slight advantage because of his gubernatorial campaign and just already getting his name and his message out statewide, where Frey has been contained pretty much into his own House district. And both individuals during the campaign, even though Trump endorsed Graham, they've both leaned into the fact that they are Trump candidates, and so very much trying to play to the more MAGA base of the Republican Party. And, you know, it'll be very curious to see who wins. I mean, I am not surprised that they are neck and neck, because they're basically competing for the same type of voter. Whoever comes in second, the next sort of big question is, will the people on the other side throw their weight behind that individual against Darlene Graham? And obviously it's too soon to figure that one out. But the fact that they're both leaning into those MAGA credentials, I think we're seeing a split among that base, which is why they're running neck and neck.
And then you have folks like Norman, who endorsed former Governor Nikki Haley in the 2024 race. That's kind of hanging over his head when it comes to MAGA credentials we're talking about. Then you have Russell Frey, people saying, please don't run because you could jeopardize our slim majority if there's a vacancy. So it will be interesting to see if the president ups his ante when it comes to Darlene in the runoff, because we did not see him do that for Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evette. In fact, quite the opposite when he endorsed her opponent. So different candidates, different race. It will be what we'll be watching over these next 2 weeks. But we're going to go to Reagan Knight, who's down there in the Charleston area at Governor Mark Sanford's watch party. What's going on down there, Reagan? How are those spray painted signs?
Hey, Gavin. Right now, the former governor, he just entered the Kickin' Chicken roughly about 10 minutes ago, and he's talking to everybody right now inside the restaurant, slowly making his way over to the podium that's directly behind me. We are keeping an eye out right now on the poll numbers. He's currently trailing at 14%. He's got 14% of the vote right now, excuse me. Right now, the chatter I am hearing throughout the restaurant is, will this be enough to carry him into a runoff election against Darlene Graham? He's directly right now behind our camera crew right now, making his way over, and we are expecting to hear him talk about what his plans are next if he were to win for the runoff election, or if he loses for tonight's primary. We're expecting to hear his future plans at some point tonight. Gavin?
Reagan, for that, yeah, of course, the former governor and congressman. It's interesting to look at his political trajectory. He went into Congress in 1994 with the late Senator Graham, too. At the same time, they were part of that wave in the 90s back in the House, and then he served 3 terms there before becoming governor in 2003. And then he appeared to be on that trajectory for higher office. A lot of people were talking about possibly going for president, but of course there was that extramarital affair in 2009 that derailed all that. However, he had to come back in 2013 when he got his old House seat back in the 1st Congressional District, but lost that primary back in 2018 to then State Representative Katie Arrington. And of course, Arrington went on to lose that seat to Democrat Joe Cunningham, flipping that seat Democrat for the first time in some 40 years. Exactly. The Republicans fixed that because they redistricted the hell out of that seat. Exactly. They went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they wanted to redistrict again this past year, Kirk, and all the Republicans in the State House were like, please don't make us do it. The White House told them to do it. We spent a couple weeks at the end of session trying to do it, and of course it didn't work out. And the first day of early in-person voting, everyone threw their hands up because they realized just what you could essentially do with our state when it comes to the 7 congressional districts. And you can't get rid of one Democratic district with Jim Clyburn, because the Democrats still go into these other districts too, and you just made the tightest districts you could based on the Supreme Court, and now you want to redo it. It was fascinating to see that play out.
Well, there was that, and as we were talking about during Lindsey Graham's memorial, South Carolina has a habit of sort of re-electing people, certainly in the Senate. Mm-hmm. We keep putting people back in office, and Jim Clyburn, has been in the House for decades, and I think there was real hesitancy to potentially move him out of that district. Had it been another Democrat, maybe things would have been a little bit different. But Jim Clyburn has done a tremendous amount for the state, and so I think there was some hesitancy there. But you figure, going back to Mark Sanford, You know, a lot of the chatters, folks that I have spoken to, stuff that I've read online, they can't forget what happened when he was governor. And it might be less so about the affair because, let's be honest, that seems to be happening more and more among politicians now. But I think it was the fact that he lied about his whereabouts, he disappeared for 3 days. And I think that was a breach of trust that, from what I've seen, a lot of individuals just don't want to forget. They can't get over that. And so it's not surprising that his numbers are coming in lower than the other candidates.
And Kirk, we were talking about re-electing folks in South Carolina in the Senate. We were talking about ages too, and I'm not being ageist here. I'm just going to illustrate some numbers. But we were looking back at all the senators in the modern era in South Carolina, and just how old they were when they got into office. In 2013, Tim Scott was 47 when he was appointed. 2004, Jim DeMint was 53. Senator Graham was 47 in 2002 when he won. And then, of course, we have to go all the way back to 1966 with Senator Fritz Hollings, who was 44, and he stayed in there, of course. And then Strom Thurmond back in 1954 was elected at the young age of 51. So, and Lindsey replaced him in 2002. So I'm wondering, too, if that's going to come into play when we look at who makes the runoff in terms of, you know, if Ralph Norman's up there, he's 73, Darlene is 62. And Russell Fry is 41. You know, like we're talking very young. He could be in there for 60 years based on some of these trajectories if you play like that. But we did talk about term limits on This Week in South Carolina, and he's big on term limits too. But of course, we heard the same thing from Senator Tim Scott about not wanting to run again, and now he is going to be running again as well. So everyone kind of becomes indispensable when they get to Washington, I think.
Totally agree. And I would say, just in terms of the term limits, I think that's a very easy thing to campaign on, to say that you're in favor of, because you know it's just not going to happen. In order to get those term limits, that would require a constitutional amendment. And given the polarization in the country and the need to have supermajority votes, not just in both chambers of Congress, but among the states themselves, the likelihood that an amendment passes is virtually zero. So that's an easy thing to say, yes, I'm in favor of. But I think you're right in terms of the ages themselves. You know, if that was something that resonated among voters, I think that would give Russell Fry the edge. I'm not entirely sure the voters care as much about the age when someone first is elected, but I think once they're in office, then I think returning them to office, assuming, you know, they don't take votes that alienate most of the constituents, I think returning them to office has been something that South Carolina has demonstrated it is not just willing, but very eager to do, because especially in the Senate, building up that kind of seniority matters. I mean, we saw that with Lindsey Graham. You know, it took him a little while, but once he had that seniority, he was able to bring a lot of resources back to the state. Strom Thurmond, Fritz Hollings did the exact same thing. Tim Scott is kind of on the cusp of being able to do that, which is perhaps why he's talking about another term, because he recognizes I'm now the senior senator, and that gives him a little bit more cachet. But I think the state very much is eager to keep people in place whenever they can.
Right, and we saw that with Senator Graham. You know, he was chair of the Budget Committee. He was in line to be chair of the Judiciary Committee. He had briefly done that. Again, yeah, he briefly done it with Chuck Grassley going back and forth there. And of course, Senator Scott's over the Banking Committee too, so that also entices him to stick around. Because we'll get back to this in a moment, but in terms of bringing back the bacon to South Carolina, now it looks like a Jim Clyburn one-man show when it comes to that.
Exactly.
But we're going to go and talk to Scott Morgan, who's up in Rock Hill at Congressman Ralph Norman's watch party. What's going on there, Scott?
Well, we just heard some cheers upstairs, but I don't know what that means quite yet. It looks like Ralph Norman is kind of pulling ahead a little bit of Russell Fry. It seems like he's got a couple of extra points on him, but it's actually it's getting a little more anticipatory here. It's getting a little more festive here. I was actually just walking around talking to some folks, and they were talking about why they're sticking around in a kind of a hot, muggy night and just waiting for the results of this thing. They're just telling stories about how, Congressman Norman just always represented them, and they think he's going to do a great job when it comes to, the leadership that he's got in the House is going to go for the Senate. You can hear some more. Applause right now. Again, I don't know exactly what it means, but people seem to be pretty happy right now. So, well, I guess we're going to find out in a minute. But again, the vibe here is actually pretty chill. It's people are just kind of hanging out, relaxing, having a drink, having something to eat, waiting to hear what's going to happen. And we'll find out in a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, and I think those cheers correlate with what we're seeing at the numbers right now, according to the Associated Press. Ralph Norman's pulling ahead right there in the second place at 25% to Russell Fry at 20%. Again, we're seeing Norman really own the upstate with Senator Darlene Graham kind of right behind him in a lot of these, but really cleaning up like he was doing in the gubernatorial race in some ways. As you can see there, some new numbers right there. Darlene Graham's at 33%. Of course, the race has already been called for her advancing to the runoff on August 25th. And you see Congressman Norman at 25% and Congressman Fry at 20% there. So this is this horse race that we're watching here, Kirk. It's kind of making a break right there. And I'm wondering, when we look, if we start hypothetically looking at what this runoff for the next 2 weeks looks like, I'm thinking back to a lot of the stuff that we heard on the campaign trail from Norman. He's established himself over the past a year and a half, it sounds like. But also when we go back to that debate, that first debate, the only debate that Darlene was able to participate in, and the answer about data centers. And when you're up there in Rock Hill in York County, there's a data center being built. It's not popular. I remember hearing a lot of folks talking about that. And it's really a hot topic right now that could be up there with affordability as we're hearing about it. And Norman's been very apt to push back on that, kind of give the local counties that ability. But we did hear from Senator Graham saying that she was really in support of those because President Trump is in support of those. It's always going to be hard to see who really stays in line with President Trump to the bitter end and how that might cost them versus breaking a little bit when it comes to these issues that affect folks in their neighborhoods.
Yeah, and it's unclear exactly which issue is going to be the magic one that kind of cleaves the voters to one candidate versus another. So you mentioned the data centers, and that is getting more and more controversial. You have the power issues that come with that, the environmental aspects that come with that. But then you have other issues, you have sort of immigration, you have the economy, you have affordability. And Norman, I think, has done a pretty good job of maneuvering himself across those issues in ways that resonate with, again, more of the MAGA base. And as the numbers come in from the upstate, it would not surprise me to see Norman starting to galvanize support within that area. I mean, that's sort of been one of the strongholds for the more conservative Republicans, and that's an area where I could see Fry maybe having a bit more of a struggle with. So that could be why we're starting to see Norman break away a little bit.
And it's about 8:45, and we're going to get out of here around 9. So we would love to hear from Senator Darlene Graham, who the Associated Press has called advancing to the runoff while Congressman Ralph Norman and Congressman Russell Fry battled out for second place there. But we have seen Ralph Norman making a pretty good break, a 5-point break above Congressman Fry. So it's still very early. 67% of the votes have been counted so far. We're still waiting to see how this shakes out. But again, things are progressing. But when we talk about Congressman Norman too, Kirk, he's a member of the House Freedom Caucus, the far-right Freedom Caucus. That's kind of been a thorn in the side of President Donald Trump over the years. That's something we could probably see Darlene exploiting on the campaign trail over the next 2 weeks. Also, he's been endorsed by far-right senators Mike Lee of Utah and Florida's Senator Rick Scott. He's also been ranked as one of the most conservative members of Congress as well. So it's interesting to see how that's going to play out too. He wants to cut regulations, and he wants to, he's a fan of personhood abortion rights. So really just, restricting abortion as much as possible. So we're going to really have to start seeing these battle lines being drawn over the next 2 weeks. But also, going back to the Republican gubernatorial primary, the immediacy of these endorsements. Who does Mark Sanford jump to? Who does Russell Fry, if he does not, Pete Norman here, who does he jump to? Does Mark Lynch get involved? I mean, where do these other small amount of votes, which will add up to big results in 2 weeks, because again, it's going to be even more, it's going to be even fewer folks voting, I feel like. Where does that go? How does the next 2 weeks look, essentially?
Well, so you had mentioned in terms of Norman and the Freedom Caucus, I think any of the candidates, this is something that they're going to wrestle with. On the one hand, you have Donald Trump, who is still the standard bearer for the Republican Party. But on the other hand, the party itself is having to come to grips with what does life look like after Donald Trump is no longer president.
True.
And there have been some very unpopular things. I mean, we still have the issue with the Epstein files. We have the Iran war. And these are things that folks like Norman and the Freedom Caucus have been very much against in terms of Trump's position. So the extent to which they start to break away a little bit more with Donald Trump is going to be interesting. And then the candidates, should this happen, have to decide, where do they fall? Do they try and move the Republican Party into a post-Trump sort of era, or do they stick to the person that kind of got them into the office in the first place? That's going to be a very difficult decision for each of those candidates to make. But I think in the next 2 weeks, whoever comes in second place, that's going to be sort of the underlying theme between them and Darlene Graham in terms of getting the ultimate nomination.
And of course, we heard from Senator Graham, who voted today in Lexington County, where she lives, saying that she's willing to work with folks on a multitude of issues, echoing her late brother, who was able to do that. Some would say to a fault, because he would routinely get booed, like I saw him in Pickens in July in 2023 when he was opening for President Donald Trump with tens of thousands of folks there, and just sustained boos while he had to kind of talk through it. I don't think she's going to be quite like that. I mean, obviously, we haven't seen how she would vote on a Democrat's choice for a Supreme Court justice or anything like that, but it'd be interesting to see if she did keep up with what her brother established there, too. But then you see folks like Ralph Norman, who I don't know if he would be willing to work with everyone across the aisle, and I don't know if he'd be willing to bring the pork back home to South Carolina. And of course, we know that Sanford probably wouldn't be a fan of that either, since he had those pigs up at the State House again like he did 22 years ago. But he said, of course, it all depends on the merits, too, when you look at money coming back to the state, especially when it comes to infrastructure projects like our state is experiencing this rapid growth. You need money to build a new bridge over Lake Marion, to deepen the Charleston Harbor, to do all these things to keep up with growth. Otherwise, people are going to vote you out of office.
Yeah, and when you think of Lindsey Graham, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier, early on in his career, he very much was he was part of the Gang of Eight, Democrats and Republicans in the Senate that would work together and get things done, that would actually govern. Now the politics are different, and bipartisanship is sort of a four-letter word that we all stay away from. But yet you still have to govern. And it's unclear, Darlene Graham has not been in a position yet where she has had to work across the aisle. It's unclear the extent to which she would be willing to do so. Same with someone like a Ralph Norman or a Russell Fry. In the House, it is very easy to speak against partisanship because it's really majority will, and that's all. But in the Senate, the minority, by design, has a tremendous influence because it forces those compromises. And so it's unclear whether Norman or Fry would be willing to do that, which means regardless of who the nominee might be, if they're unwilling to reach across the aisle, we've lost some of the influence that Lindsey Graham was really famous for. And that was one of the reasons that made him so effective in the Senate.
That's a very good point there, Kirk, and something that, again, redefines our entire congressional delegation in a sense. We have so much turnover. Obviously, you're going to, whatever happens, I mean, if Congressman Norman moves up to the Senate, he's still in the delegation, but if he's not, he's out because he's not running again. You're seeing just we don't have Senator Graham anymore. There's been a lot of movement that some folks might not be running again in the future. Just a lot of change, especially for a state like ours where we are growing so much. It is important to get a lot of that funding from DC back here, especially for infrastructure like we're talking about.
Right.
So,
and a lot of change for a state that's not used to change, right? Not accustomed
Talking about
to
a four-letter
change,
word.
right? So we're kind of evolving as a
Right.
state in that regard as well.
So it's going to be, again, fascinating to see how these debates, how these conversations, how these attack ads play out over the next coming weeks. I think people are going to want specifics. I think they're going to want to see what people are actually going to do. I think you have someone like Senator Graham who can maybe say, what have you been doing? And Congressman Norman can say the same thing to her, but she has already got some things under her belt in the Senate, so that's going to be an interesting thing to watch as well. But again, the big X factor will be, what does President Donald Trump do? What does the polling look like? Will there be a dual endorsement again? Will he maybe cut a video ad? Will he come down here? Hard to say because of the way he's been treating a lot of these primaries recently.
Yeah, and we haven't even gotten to the general election yet. So this is all with Democrats remaining relatively silent. Once we get past that, the runoff, then those gloves come off, and then you get the outside money, the PACs and things coming in, and so we have yet to turn the corner in this election. This has just been sort of a one-sided show up to this point in time.
Yeah, and I think we'll be jumping to Senator Graham's watch party shortly. She's expected to come out and address the media that's gathered there. But until that happens, Kirk, that's a good point, too, when we start talking about the general election in November. Obviously, Annie Andrews, who's a pediatrician, is a Democratic nominee. There's a Libertarian and a Constitution Party candidate as well on the ballot there. So maybe that's also going to factor into the next 2 weeks. Who can beat Dr. Andrews? Obviously, there's been kind of concerns I've been hearing about people saying, who's going to be able to beat her? It's still South Carolina.
Right.
And I know I don't want to ruin November for people, but it's still South Carolina. It's not North Carolina. It's not Georgia. We are not a purple state. And so I think you're going to see folks like Ralph Norman, if he was to win, say, it's just like what we've been hearing from folks in Columbia who, Republicans, I should say, in the supermajority in the House and the Senate saying, hey, we have a supermajority here. Why don't we act like it? You're going to see, I think, that kind of messaging throttle up. And a lot of folks who maybe didn't like Senator Lindsey Graham can say, finally, we have someone who is kicking the tires, lighting the fires, and saying, let's do what we came here to do, and applying that kind of pressure. I think it's going to be fun to watch what that messaging looks like over the next 2 weeks when it comes to general election and looking ahead to that.
Yeah, agreed. And so right now, the candidates for Lindsey Graham's seat have been able to, by and large, define themselves without interference from the Democrats. Once we get past August 25th, then the Democratic candidate and Dr. Andrews is going to define her opponent in ways that best suits to or plays to her strengths. And so you have that wrinkle on top of things, which then makes you wonder, will whoever the Republican candidate is, will they lean into the demographics of this state? Because as you said, South Carolina is still solidly red.
Yeah.
And I think Dr. Andrews has an uphill battle no matter who the Republican nominee might be. But that's an aspect that the state, I think, is going to have to decide. Do we use the political muscle, Republicans, do we use the political muscle that we have? And if so, what's that going to look like?
Yeah, and before we get, too many angry phone calls or angry emails, I just want to go ahead and, point to Cook Political Report and how we were a solid Republican state. I want to look back to 2020 when we saw then Senator Lindsey Graham defeat Democrat Jamie Harrison by 10 solid points after Jamie Harrison raised $140 million. Of course, that was a presidential, but also we have, a gubernatorial race at the top of the ticket here, too. That's nothing to shake a stick at. Folks will be turning out for that. The Republicans, if you have an R behind that name, it's pretty much straight party ticket voting is still a thing here, and people just cast that straight Republican or straight Democrat ballot, and there's more Republicans in the state than Democrats. So unless a million Democrats get imported overnight. The folks that are moving to South Carolina, they're not all Democrats. In fact, they're all there's a lot of them that are Republicans moving to the coast, up and down the coast.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to rack my brain for the last time a Democrat won a statewide race, and I think it was Jim Hodges.
It was, for the governor,
For
in
the
2006, 2006 for
Right?
Jim Rex and the superintendent of education.
That's right. Exactly. And you had, say, like Vincent Shaheen came close
Sure.
when he ran against Nikki Haley. But the Democrats have had a really difficult time gaining a foothold in those statewide elections.
I think we're gonna stick around here for a little bit longer. It's almost 9 o'clock. We were going to try and leave at 9 o'clock, but we're told that Senator Darlene Graham should be speaking very soon to the reporters that are gathered in Columbia. So we're going to maybe hang around a little bit longer there too. Maybe jump around to folks and see what's new at those locations across the state. I will let folks know that Congressman Russell Fry did not have a watch party set up tonight, so that's why we're not there. We also we wouldn't have enough people to send anyway, but that made the decision a little bit easier on our end here. We were sending folks across the state. But as you can see there, Darlene Graham, Senator Graham, is at 32.5%. The AP had already called her as one of the winners tonight, advancing to the runoff on August 25th. That was almost an hour ago. And you see Congressman Ralph Norman there at 24.4%, and Congressman Russell Fry at 20.5%. Again, that's the tight margins that are trying to be overcome right now, but that are really defining this race right here, Kirk, in terms of who we're going to see in that runoff going forward on August 25th. And two different kind of people. I mean, I don't know. If you don't like Darlene Graham, would you prefer Russell Fry or Ralph Norman to win? I mean, I'm trying to think who has a harder shot or an easier shot at defeating her.
That's really difficult to say. Again, I think perhaps it comes down to the fact that Norman has more name recognition across the entire state just because of the gubernatorial race that he ran. That will certainly be one of the challenges for Russell Fry, is to get his name out more broadly than he's been able to do in the last couple of weeks. But they're both sort of competing for that MAGA base in the Republican Party. And it's not clear who the best standard bearer would be for that faction.
Yeah, and I guess we can also frame it by saying, who would Darlene like to go up against too, and who's she calling right now and who's she talking to? Of course, there's only 74% of the votes counted. There's a 4-point difference right now between Congressman Norman and Congressman Fry. Then, of course, former Governor Mark Sanford there in fourth place at 14%. So I think that was a bit of a wild card. Maybe we were thinking could possibly be a possibility when it came to the former governor, because he just kind of jumped right there in the race. He was kind of a similar lane as Congressman Norman when you talk about this fiscal streak, being very tight with the money. That's a message that we've seen Mark Sanford carry in all of his years in politics, from the 90s onwards too, and it's taken on a little bit more of a mission for him because the debt is just increasing so much now. And of course, we hear from Congressman Norman about the same thing too. But it kind of makes you wonder, what's going to happen going forward. Should they be reelected? Should there be a divided Congress, and how that plays out when it comes to the debt and the deficit?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing to watch. I think the other thing that's going to be interesting, and you had mentioned this a little bit earlier, is in terms of endorsements moving forward, not just from the candidates who are going to run or who are running right now, and not even just from sitting members in the Senate that, some of those endorsements have come in. But there's some other notable names among South Carolinians that have been silent up to this point. I'm thinking someone like a Trey Gowdy and Nikki Haley, a David Beasley. The extent to which they get into that conversation will be interesting.
Sounds like we might have Congressman Ralph Norman speaking to the press, even though it's tight. He's up by 4 points or so, but it sounds like he must be pretty confident to get out there in front of the press and give us an address here. So we're still waiting to hear from Senator Graham, but it sounds like Congressman Norman's going to maybe say he's our second place winner, and he'll advance to the August 25th primary. Again, we are not saying that because the Associated Press has not said that yet. There's only 77% of the votes counted so far. It's been almost 2 hours since the polls closed. But there's his wife, Elaine. She's pretty ecstatic too, and so is the congressman. Let's listen in. we're trying to get audio here. He's still celebrating with his wife Elaine there. A big moment here. Obviously, he didn't advance in the gubernatorial primary runoffs, so this is a nice little cherry on top for him after losing that. We're trying to get our audio from this moment, and hopefully we'll bring it to you soon. But we have to imagine that he is declaring that he is the second place winner based on what he's hearing from his people who are looking at returns. Again, the Associated Press has not called this for Norman as the second place candidate yet. And I'm not good at reading lips, so I can't tell you what he's saying.
No, but his body language is looking very happy.
Yeah, so is Elaine.
That seemed more of a victory speech than a concession.
Right. And I think that's interesting to watch. Again, Kirk, when we're talking about these candidates, obviously we're still learning a lot about Darlene, but she's really putting herself in the mold of her brother, but a 2.0 version, maybe a more domestic version of her brother, not so much the foreign policy aspect, because as she said, her brother was in the Air Force, in the reserves, active duty, National Guard for 30 plus years. In fact, they just renamed Joint Base Charleston Joint Base Lindsey Graham on Monday. She was down there with Secretary Hegseth, Secretary Bessent, the governor, again, assuming that role as the junior senator and not really missing a beat, showing up and just doing this in the middle of, again, still grieving her brother. But it's interesting because we're seeing her become this second version of Graham, of her brother. But then you have Congressman Norman, who's still very much House Freedom Caucus. Wants to see that advance more in the Senate. That's why he's got those endorsements from Utah Senator Mike Lee and Florida Senator Rick Scott. So those lanes are forming. And there's also a lot of ties between these campaigns and folks who are out there, too. I mean, I know, for example, for Russell Fry's campaign, a lot of young Republicans, we have audio of his speech right now, Congressman Norman, who's giving his second place speech.
People really rallied in the work that was put in, and I just want to thank all my staff, both from Congress and here, and what they did, because it means a lot. You don't do this for all the rest. I'm excited for South Carolina. I'm excited for freedom. I'm excited to take another 2 weeks and just tell our message and go all over the state. It's so humbling to be here. And all of you play such a big part. So thank you for all your effort, your time, your tithe, your talent. And let's win this thing in a big way. Out to all the other candidates and asking for their support. And I ask y'all for your prayers, and I ask you for another go-around that will be a fun time in the political arena here in South Carolina. So I will be glad to take any questions of the media if they have any.
What will your strategy be to beat Darlene Graham?
I hope we'll have a good many debates. I know we're scheduled a debate for Monday. I look forward to getting in all the issues. I look forward to hearing what her plan is, hearing what her platform is, and doing the debates as we have been for the last, 5 weeks, 3 weeks. So I look forward to that.
Congressman Norman, the race it's coming up quickly. About 2 weeks. What do you want to say to voters tonight who maybe they supported someone else, they didn't support you? What's your message to them tonight?
Here's my message. I may not have been the first choice. I may not have been the second choice. I want to be the third and fourth choice of everybody. I want everybody to unite and come with us because we've got the right message. I've got a great resume that I'm proud of. I really feel like that South Carolina and the country's up to it. So I would tell people to let's get involved in this race. Let's help us take it to the next level. Yes, sir. And we can do that.
Trump endorsement. Alan Wilson beat a Trump endorsed opponent. Your thoughts?
Well, I asked for the president's endorsement, didn't get it. But anybody would want the endorsement. But he chose who he did, and that's fine. South Carolina's going to decide the next senator. I'm going
did the governor's race prepare you for this short-lived campaign?
The governor's race prepared me, one, to get to meet the people in South Carolina. I was known in the 5th District, but I wasn't known in Charleston, in Hilton Head, Beaufort, parts of Greenville. What I enjoyed was going around the state. We met great people. We met people who bought into our campaign. So that helped me a lot.
Yeah, sure.
Because this was such a short runway. But people, my name recognition was 87%. And as I went around, I got more encouraged because the crowds got bigger, the electricity was there, and it was just a great experience. It really was.
Congressman, how do you plan to draw contrast with your now opponent, Senator Darlene Graham, and show voters how the two of you are different and why you're the better choice?
Well, I don't know where she stands on a lot of issues. I think that's where we'll find out. Where she stands on pro-life, where she stands on the death penalty, where will she stand on spending. So we'll get into the debate, which I welcome the debate. My record is an open book. You know what I've done. And I will continue that because I think that we're at a critical point because what really attracted me to this race, the Senate is malfunctioning, is where good bills go to die. And I will play a role in passing particularly the SAVE Act, which is verification that you are an American citizen before you vote. I will be laser focused on that. And I will be laser focused on calling the Senate out. They're on a 5-week vacation. That shouldn't happen. And so that's just one of the many things. The overall conservative platform of peace through strength, the American First agenda, I'm all into it. President Trump has laid out a great framework that I will be a part of and will promote. And my record backs that up. I'd love to have another reconciliation package. I'd love to have another big, beautiful bill where we reform the tax code, where we work to cut regulations, where we empower the taxpayer. That's what that's about. And we'll debate those issues, and I'm sure there'll be some differences. But I welcome that. And I really trust the people of South Carolina to make the right call.
So you plan for the two of you to face off at a debate. Is that in discussion yet? Or
Absolutely. I'm committed to a debate Monday. The sooner the better. Let's have it. It's fair for the people. We're getting ready to elect a person that's going to serve 6 years. 6 years. And the people of South Carolina need to know everything about where I stand and where she stands. And we will lay out those differences, which is a good thing.
Have you talked to any other candidates tonight? Are you?
I just walked down. I'm getting ready to call every one of them. Mark that.
All right.
And I will be calling President Trump, not tonight, but I will call him tomorrow.
Yes.
There we go. Thank y'all. Appreciate you.
All right, that was a very jubilant Congressman Ralph Norman there. Kirk, again, the Associated Press has now confirmed that he is the second place winner tonight, and he'll be advancing to that August 25th runoff with Senator Darlene Graham. The stage has been set, Kirk. We are going to be watching that next 2 weeks. He was talking about how he's going to define himself between him and the senator. We're hoping to hear from her soon. I'm told maybe in 5 minutes or so, because we have now heard from Congressman Norman. He's already out there talking about how the next couple of weeks are going to shape up. There's going to be a debate soon on Newsmax next week. So it would be good to hear from the senator about this too, with a lot of folks at that watch party too. What did you take away from his speech there and what he plans to do for the next 2 weeks, Kirk?
What jumped out at me immediately was one of the very first things he said. He was asked a question about how you would differentiate yourself from Senator Graham. And his answer was, well, it's hard to say because I don't know where she stands on the issues. And I think that is probably the single biggest advantage that he has going into the next 2 weeks. You know, the fact that she has zero track record for people to evaluate really means that she is going to have to go out of her way to articulate those positions and Congressman Norman can just sort of sit back and reframe things in ways that play to his strengths. So I think that gives him a significant advantage going forward. Obviously, her advantage is the Graham name, the Trump endorsement. Whether Trump also endorses Norman later is anyone's guess, and Graham's staff. So you've got two candidates, both with decent strengths and certainly some challenges in front of them. But Norman, I think, being able to just simply say, my opponent is just a giant question mark, I think that is going to be a tremendous message that we will see him lean into in the next 2 weeks.
And Kirk, along those lines too, when we look demographically and we look geographically at the state, I mean, I'm looking at the map here and he's just owning the upstate. That's going to be a huge uphill battle for Senator Graham going forward. But also, it was fun to hear Congressman Norman use a line that we heard from Attorney General Alan Wilson. If I wasn't your first choice or your second choice or your third choice, I'm glad I'll be your choice now. I'll work for that vote. And maybe that's what's going on behind the scenes right now with Senator Graham. Maybe she's talking to Congressman Russell Fry or the former Governor Mark Sanford in terms of trying to secure those votes, maybe see what she needs to do to make that work. Because before we went to Congressman Norman, I was talking about how I just saw a lot of young Republicans that I know as colleagues and work with professionally. You see a lot of them were backing Russell Fry in this race, and I can't imagine them going over to the Norman side. I think that a lot of those networks are going to shift over maybe to the Graham side. In the coming days, we'll see those endorsements shifting, those coalitions building, and the momentum and that sprint again continuing, because it's 2 weeks, Kirk, and this is again not just a special primary, but this is a special runoff primary right now.
Exactly.
When every vote's going to count. I'm sure there's going to be swarms of door knockers. If you were tired of getting text messages and mailers, we'll get ready for it because it's going to ramp right up.
Yeah, now we're in a mad dash. If we thought this was a crazy sprint over the last 2 weeks, it's now a mad dash over the next 2 weeks. And it's both about getting the message out to define who you are, but maybe more importantly, it is mobilizing your camps to get people to the polls. Because statistically, these kinds of runoffs have such low turnout that really it's just a handful of people, a few thousand votes that could easily mean the difference between getting the nomination and not. So Norman, Graham, first thing is to scramble, contact the other candidates, try and get them into your camp so that you can have their political machine working on your behalf, encourage the people who voted for Fry, for Sanford, for Lynch, for anybody else to now cast their vote in your camp. And then it's going to be some more of these public events. You heard Congressman Norman talk about he's looking forward to the debate. A five-person debate is very hard to kind of command the spotlight. A one-on-one debate becomes a whole lot easier. And, you know, Darlene Graham doesn't have a whole lot of experience with those. Ralph Norman does. So I would imagine that he is looking forward to that as a way to take advantage, maybe dominate that debate in a way that demonstrates his credentials over hers.
Right, and hopefully whatever debates we do see play out over the coming days are a little bit more cordial than what we saw in the Republican gubernatorial primary runoff debate, where I was in Conway and you know, people were openly heckling folks on the stage.
Nasty.
Something I've never seen before. Obviously, there's things about applause in between breaks, but as a debate moderator, that's just made my skin crawl. Of course, it's past 9 o'clock right now. We were trying to get off the air at 9 o'clock. It's 9:15. It's been about 2 hours and 15 minutes, and the polls did close. We do have those two candidates that are advancing to the runoff, Senator Darlene Graham and Congressman Ralph Norman. That August 25th runoff will hold out hope a little bit longer till we can hear from Senator Graham, but it's hard to say right now. I know our fundraising folks are probably upset with me because we are in the middle of our pledge drive right now. So if you feel the need to give, you can go to scetv.org and hit that donate button for us to keep this coverage and other great programs on the air here at ETV. We appreciate your support. So that being said, Kirk, like I said, it's 9:15. We have these two candidates advancing at this point. We're going to be watching the next 2 weeks where it's going to be very intense. I'm also, again, kind of circling back here to see what President Donald Trump does, because, again, he did that dual endorsement in the Republican gubernatorial primary, mainly based on polling, what he saw coming down. This is different. I mean, he told Senator Graham, I want you in this race. She's doing it. She's been keeping pace, hasn't been faltering in any recognizable ways that we have seen publicly. So I'm wondering what his support looks like over the next 2 weeks to get her in there, showing that he's never had any issues with her brother besides the 2016 race. There's some issues after January 6th, but was in lockstep with him, just as we can imagine she would be.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we have seen from Donald Trump is that he likes to be on the side of winners. And so I got to believe right now he is very pleased. Darlene Graham, she came in first in this. You know, his name basically garnered a lot of support for her, convinced her to run for the office in the first place. So I got to believe he's very happy at what he is seeing right now. And the question is going to be, over the next 2 weeks, do the poll numbers shift significantly toward Ralph Norman or not? If they do, then I think it could be conceivable that President Trump tries to do a double endorsement like he did in the gubernatorial race. But if the numbers don't necessarily change that much, he may just stay silent and let this one endorsement ride for the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's going to be, again, something to watch. We're just
Something to watch.
We're in this pressure cooker, Kirk. Something that no one was expecting, of course, because the late senator passed away exactly a month ago today at the age of 71, and that has kicked off this entire sprint to get a new Republican nominee for the November ballot, who will face off against the Democrat, Dr. Annie Andrews, who we already talked about, faces an uphill battle. It will be interesting to see how, again, we hear these two Republican candidates talk about what November looks like and how they can fight the Democrats. I think there's obviously a lot of similarities between the two of them when it comes to their rhetoric against Democrats, but at the same time, it's going to shape how Dr. Andrews continues her campaign, shapes that messaging going forward as well.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think for Dr. Andrews, you know, on the one hand, running against Ralph Norman might play to some of her strengths, because she can paint him in ways similar that she tried to do with Lindsey Graham or just with MAGA Republicans in general. On the other hand, running against Darlene Graham herself might be a little bit more difficult because, again, as Congressman Norman just said, nobody really knows where she stands. So I got to believe Andrews is going to be looking at the next 2 weeks, and her camp is going to take very detailed notes about what each candidate says in terms of their positions.
And Kirk, before we go, has that surprised you, honestly, when you look at this past month and just how Senator Graham has gone from obscurity to really holding her own and getting into this runoff and establishing herself, and just also juggling, like, again, the grieving, the job, and the family, and then just, again, continuing on forward?
In some ways, yes, it has been kind of surprising, but in other ways, not so much. I mean, we did see something similar, albeit under completely different circumstances, with Tim Scott when he first got appointed to fill Jim DeMint's seat when he left the Senate. Scott was not as unknown as Darlene Graham is, but he was still relatively unknown and took a little while to sort of establish himself in the Senate. That's where Lindsey Graham became very, very helpful. So Darlene Graham has a similar kind of moment, but where the difficulty lies is what we have already mentioned. She's doing all of this within 2 weeks, whereas Tim Scott was able to have a much longer on-ramp to when he had to run for that seat than what she has. So he was able to just build stuff a bit more slowly and play to his strengths over an extended period of time.
And unfortunately, we're not going to be broadcasting Senator Graham's speech because she's not speaking. So we've gone over our time already, but we will have that for you at youtube.com/SCETV News, and we'll have a full recap of the governor's runoff race soon on This Week in South Carolina. I think actually Twisk is in pledge this week, and of course we are in pledge right now, so feel free to donate as well. But we will be back on August 25th with our runoff show. Thank you to Kirk Randazzo, our reporters and crews in the field, as well as here in Columbia. From all of us here at South Carolina ETV and South Carolina Public Radio, thanks for tuning in and good night.